Girard at Large. I am your tan-rested, not really, and ready host, always, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. As you know, you can find us online at girardatlarge.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, also at Girard at Large, where we encourage you to like us and to follow us. Why? Well, because we have a way of finding out things that other people just don't want you to know. And we have a way of making sure that they get known. And so we got a big agenda tonight. Probably towards the second half of the show, we're going to share a clip with you of the Manchester Police Chief's interaction with the Board of Mayor and Aldermen over the question or several questions about Manchester's status as a sanctuary city or not. I have to tell you that my jaw did this a couple times as I was watching it. And so we're going to share that clip with you, and we're going to have what we would call a few stop the tape moments while we point out some of the more interesting things that the police chief both said and didn't say, and how he sidestepped many of the questions. There's this great push from Mayor Rouet and the police chief himself to say, no, we're not a sanctuary city. But I think once you know what some of the evidence or some of the facts are, I think you might have to come to the conclusion that Manchester certainly does have some sanctuary policies and practices in place, and those issues should be forthrightly put on the table and discussed because our public safety matters. But as we get started, I suppose, the big news of the week, however, just might be the entry of Ward 6 Alderman Crissy Kantor to the race for mayor. I have been aware that Kantor was looking at a run. And in conversations that I had with her, and I don't think I'm going to be sharing anything here that is out of line, but basically, I think that she feels personally responsible for the fact that Jay Rouet is mayor and has not followed the promises. Now, during the last campaign, it was pretty clear that Crissy Kantor, who when she puts her mind to something is a force of nature, was behind Jay Rouet. Her ward was wallpapered with Jay Rouet signs, and she frankly carried him through that ward and many other places in the city. She worked hard. And as the past year has unfolded, she has grown more and more troubled by how willing he is not only to violate many of the campaign promises that he made, but also make pretend they never were made in the first place. And so because she worked so hard for him and because she persuaded so many people to vote for him, she kind of feels like he's put her in the position of having lied to people. As she was making phone calls around, for example, if I had decided that I was going to run for mayor, she gladly would not have run and would have supported me instead. And there were other conversations that she had with other folks that were very similar in nature. And obviously, I'm telling you now that for the fact that I'm considering a run for office, mayor is just not in the cards for me, both because of personal and professional, I don't want to say challenges or situations. Let's just say I've got a lot on my plate. And I know that were I to make a run for mayor, that I would have to put a lot of things that I just really cannot put on hold any longer, on hold to do that, especially if I won. And so I will obviously not be a candidate for mayor. But, Crissy Kantor, she feels betrayed by Jay Rouet. And I say that at the risk of making it sound like maybe this is, a vendetta that she has, and it's really not. But I think it's a sign of the woman's integrity as a person, because as she said to me, she said, look, I feel like because I was misled, I misled others. And she said, there's a problem here, and he's just not governing the way he said he would. He's just not even trying to honor many of the promises that he made. And since I helped put him into office, I feel somewhat responsible to be part of the solution that replaces him in office. And so I actually respect and admire that viewpoint. She's willing to put herself on the line to correct a problem that she sees, a problem she believes she was duped into helping create. And so the best way she has to recover from that is to, in fact, put herself as a candidate for mayor on the ballot as an alternative for the people of the city of Manchester. So Crissy Kantor's in the race. And in as much as there are now 2 Republicans running, you're almost guaranteed to get a Democrat to jump in because, look, and one thing that we really should be looking to do as a city is get away from this what's called jungle primary that we have. Because frankly, it creates it creates an unlevel playing field that is very disadvantageous to Republicans. And so, before we had nonpartisan elections in Manchester, we had a mayor and a board of 12 aldermen, 8 of which were Republican. And when Ray Wazorek took office in 1989, it was him as the Republican mayor. Dave Wibby was the Ward 1 Republican alderman, and Jackie Domain was the Ward 8 Republican alderman. The rest of the board was Democrat. And Ray Wazorek, Camille Crafey, who ran for school board in Ward 12, is saying she feels guilty as well. She believes they were bamboozled. She will not be supporting Jay Rouet. And so I think what you're going to see with the Crissy Kantor thing is a lot of disaffected conservatives who thought that he would be a conservative mayor, and he really hasn't been, are going to step up and help Crissy. So you're going to have a dystopian type of campaign here where you're going to have the entrenched interests, the establishment, if you will, backing Jay Rouet, and you'll have the grassroots, the insurgents, the Trump types supporting Crissy Kantor. But back to what I was saying here, and that is, so Wazorek. So in 1991, when I managed his campaign for re-election, we went from, the Republicans went from having 2 aldermen on the board to having 4 aldermen on the board, which means that Wazorek had the clout. That was Dave Wibby, Ward 1, Françoise Elise Sack in Ward 2. She was still Sack at that point in time. Leo Pepino, our dear friend Leo, in Ward 4. Maybe there were 5. Tom Robert in Ward 11, and I believe Bobby Perizzo in Ward 9. So Wazorek had a veto. He didn't have a majority on the board, but he had a veto. They could sustain a veto. And Wazorek was at his most powerful, I think, when he had the, where he could force what he wanted because he could block the board on anything that it wanted to do. And so in 1993, Tim Reiniger ends up winning a seat on the board. Danny Goonan wins in Ward 7, or that might have happened in 95. And eventually, I think in 97, they picked up Ward 8 Alderman Al Hebert. And unfortunately, Al was one of those, he played conservative, but he really voted with the Democrats most of the time. So, but the point of the matter is that, and Manchester was no less a Democrat city back in the 90s than it is today. It might not be as conservative Democrat, but nonetheless. And so what ends up happening, and I will always remember this, and this is why this is a bad thing, right? So when I ran Wazorek's re-election campaign back in 1991, I will always remember this. His opponent in the election was John J. McDonough, the man, the myth, the legend. And McDonough put this ad on the obituary page after the primary, because John only put his ads on the obituary page, which is actually kind of smart because it is the most read page, or at least it used to be, in the newspaper, and I think it probably still is. And he puts it after the primary, he says, McDonough thrashes Wazorek in Queen City primary. And he put their respective results. And John gets something like 8,000 votes in the primary, and Wazorek got 3,700. Of course, that was 8,000 Democrats, 3,700 Republicans. And so he was trying to build the image that the incumbent was in trouble. And so what ended up happening, of course, is Wazorek ended up winning that race, something like 12,000 to 8,000 or 12,000 to 9. I think it was 12 to 8. So he might have gotten 6,000 or 7,000 votes in the primary because he went up about 1,000, 1,500 in the general election. And Wazorek, Wazorek resoundingly, it was a resounding win for Wazorek. And so the lesson really is that in a primary, the die-hard committed voters of both parties turn out. They're your grassroots, your activists, your crawl-over-glass voters. And in the city of Manchester, the Democrats have always had double the number of voters turn out over the Republicans. So fast forward a few years, we have this nonpartisan election, and the Republicans went from having 8 seats on the board of mayor and alderman all the way down to having 2 or maybe 3 out of what is now 14. And Ray Wazorek lost to Bob Baines not because he was viewed as a wounded duck coming out of the primary, right? So Wazorek won that primary between himself, Baines, and Soucy. He came in first, but he only got 35% of the vote. And he only got 35% of the vote because the race between Soucy and Baines, we have to remember that Democrats always have a big turnout advantage over Republicans in the primary. It's the way it always has been. It's the way it always will be. When I ran against Joyce Craig and Victoria Sullivan, right, Victoria and I were about half the vote, and Joyce was the other half. And she was the other half on the strength of the Democratic turnout, and we were were half on the strength of the Republican and the independent turnout. I went through all of those numbers with you years ago. I can do it again, but the point of the matter is that because the Democrats have an advantage in voter turnout in the primary, Republicans have a very difficult time in the primaries, whether it's an at-large, a mayoral, or a ward primary, have a very difficult time getting out of the primary. And I could tell you story after, like Mary Sisson actually came in second in a primary to Jerome Duval. The Republican in that race got knocked out because there are very few Republicans in Ward 4 that turn out in primaries. And then Sisson, who would have lost the seat if she were in a Democratic primary, came back to beat Duval in the general election. There are all kinds of stories like that. And of course, the upshot is unless you're in a Republican ward, you're not going to get a Republican through the primary in most of these places. And if you do, they're so far behind. So Wazorek goes on to lose that race for a number of reasons, not the least of which it was the worst race he had ever run in his life. But statistically, he was seen as a wounded incumbent, as somebody on the verge of losing, because only 1 out of 3 voters in the primary voted for him. Now, we can get into the details of the turnout and all that, but the perception is bad. The perception is just bad. When I ran for mayor in 2001, had it been a Republican primary against Joe Kelly Levasseur, I would have beat Levasseur by 20 points. But as it was, I survived the primary, but Baines got 50%, just over 50% of the vote. I got 31. So instead of coming out of a Republican primary with a strong 20-point win, I came in second, a distant second in a three-way primary, viewed as somebody who didn't have a chance because he started 19 points behind. So these primaries with the disparate turnout, where the Democrats have that structural advantage, are extremely difficult for Republicans to overcome. And so it does affect how campaigns are run, and it creates situations like the Craig people did not want me in the general election. So I know from people who were part of it that one of the strategies they deployed was they told Democrats that they could trust to put the word out to vote for Sullivan because they wanted Sullivan in the general. They didn't want me. So on top of everything else that I had to deal with in that primary, I had an active effort by the Craig campaign to get Democrats to vote for Sullivan, because they didn't want me in the general election. So mischief can happen, is what I'm trying to say. So, but Kantor's in, and I think there are a lot of people who are going to write her off, and I think they do so at their peril, because she may oftentimes have difficulty sort of framing a question, although she usually gets to it. You'll actually see that tonight. And sometimes because she's cognizant of the lingo and she's not always conversant in city speak or, bureau speak or any of the other crap that happens at city halls. But she's a very sharp, intuitive lady who is persistent, dogged even, determined, and she's no dope. So I think we're going to be in for a fight for City Hall, regardless of whether or not a Democrat gets in. But it would be amazing to me if a Democrat did not get into this race. They have a structural advantage in the turnout, so whoever the Democrat is, they will, in all likelihood, get one of the two seats for the general election, which means it'll be a dogfight between Jay Rouet, who sends out dishonest campaign pieces talking about how he doesn't have a lot of money. He sent out the letter after he'd raised $300,000 and after he raised an unprecedented $600,000 in the prior election. If you can't be honest about little things, can you really be trusted on some of the big ones? And I think the answer to that is no. And there are a number of issues, I think, as I've talked to people, where he has just really annoyed the conservative base of the party and could be in for an unexpected fight. So Crissy Kantor is in the race. We will have more to say about that as time comes, and hopefully we'll see what it does. Now, the next issue that I want to jump onto before I get to the police chief and the unbelievable conversation they had at City Hall is the school budget. So Tuesday night, I went to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, and yes, I do believe, I'm getting a question, I do believe, oh, yes, and Crissy Kantor, one thing is, she's like me in that if she makes a promise, she'll deliver or she'll die trying. And yes, I do believe local elections, and I think I was going in that direction. I do believe that local elections for any office should be partisan. They used to be partisan in the city of Manchester. I did a study on this a few years ago, and I think out of 240 races that had been run, and that's all of them, races for school board, alderman, mayor, welfare commissioner, out of 240 office races that had been run at the time I did the study, looking back on it, I think there was one incumbent that there was like one or two incumbents that had actually lost an election. And I actually happened to knock off one of those incumbents. That was Kathy Staub back in 2015 when I ran for school board at large. Because what nonpartisan races do is they tremendously strengthen the incumbency advantage. When you deprive voters of the knowledge of who's a Republican and who's a Democrat on the ballot, when you deprive them of that knowledge, you deprive them of information that informs their vote. When you deprive candidates of the ability to directly receive support from their political parties, you deprive them of resources that are necessary. Well, it's partisan, the party. They do, but the problem is that part of the power of that association is seeing it on a ballot, which you now cannot do. And the parties, they don't have primaries, and because of that, you have fewer candidates running. And when you have fewer candidates running, you have fewer people turning out, and that strengthens incumbency too. And so whether you like it or not, whether you think it's right or not, it is a fact that the ability to identify with a party on a ballot and to identify directly with a party during a campaign which will provide resources, et cetera, et cetera. It is a significant handicap to those who do not hold office when that cannot be done. It depresses voter turnout. It depresses candidate participation, which also depresses voter turnout. And as a result, it's unbelievable the power of incumbency in nonpartisan races. I believe I was only the third person to knock off an incumbent in 2015 when I ran, and that's saying something. You know, back in the old partisan days too, if there were vacancies on the ballot, the parties could appoint someone to represent them after the filing period closed. Now that's gone, so that hurts the ability to fill the ward offices, the moderators, the clerks, the selectmen, where oftentimes, you know, people wouldn't sign up for those, but the parties would just find their faithful, and they would put their name on the ballot. If they won, they won. If they didn't, they didn't, but at least the name was on the ballot. So moving on, I did a preemptive strike. The mayor will be releasing his budget at the end of the month, as he's required to do by charter. But the school board has already foisted an unbelievable, oh yes, and it also confuses voters, because when they go in and everyone's on the same ballot, they don't know who's who. A lot of them just don't know who's who. So, and party identification gives them an idea of who is who. So the school budget, you know, $11.5 million, a 5% increase in spending. So let me tell you what the schools did. I brought this to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen at Tuesday night's meeting, well before the mayor released his budget, because frankly, I wanted to put the mayor on notice that the school board is violating the tax cap, and if he doesn't undo what they did, if he allows them to do what they've done like he did last year, then he is violating the tax cap himself, and he cannot, he can add to, again, to his list of broken promises, the idea that he'll support and defend the tax cap. So let's talk about what they did. First off, they did get, you know, about $11.7 million in more state aid, because the state has increased the formula yet again, but they lost $9.8 million in revenue. The fake revenues that last year that they were allowed to use to increase their spending, the surplus and the money from their emergency health insurance expendable trust, that fell off the books. So there's about a $1.9 million net increase in overall revenue to the school board. And under the tax cap, they can spend that. But it's not enough for a district that is not seeing an increase in its in the number of students. They still need more, despite getting $7.5 million more last year and getting $35 million the previous year. So you've heard that right. In 2 years, you've seen their budget go up $42.5 million, actually $43.5 million in the last two budget cycles. And now they want to add another $11.5 million for a total of almost $55 million in spending in 3 years. Outrageous. But they can't get there under the tax cap unless they fudge the numbers. So what did they do to fudge the numbers this time? Well, this time to fudge the numbers, they said, how can we max, I know, we'll take the full 4.27% that the tax cap will allow us, and we'll add it to what we, you know, to what our tax warrant, the amount raised in property taxes to support us, is. Which is fine if they just used the local education tax to do that, but they didn't. The statewide property tax, which is a separate line item on your tax bill, which is controlled by the state, which is levied by the state, even though we retain those taxes locally, they added that into their tax cap calculation. They did it this year, they did it last year, and I don't know if they've done it in prior years because the documents are not clear. But that's $20 million. So if you say I get 4%, so instead of a tax cap that is levied against $100 million, which is about what their tax, the amount of property taxes that went to fund them last year. So instead of that 4.27% being assessed against $100 million, they're assessing it against $120 million. because they're counting the statewide property tax. That is most definitely a party foul because the tax cap only applies to those taxes that are raised by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, not by the state of New Hampshire. And so that padded the number that they said they were entitled to under the tax cap by 20% or more than $1 million. So if they were to get that in their budget, your local property taxes would be $1 million higher because of that little accounting trick, that budget lie, and they shouldn't be allowed to do it. The other thing that they've done, you see, because the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, it happened first under Joyce Craig, where they said, you know, we have extra revenue. We're going to take money out of our health insurance trust fund. What's the health insurance trust fund? That's money that's there so that if the health insurance line item in their budget runs a deficit, they can cover the deficit. It's an emergency savings account. I know, let's take money out of our emergency savings account and say it's a revenue. I don't know. How long would it be before your finances collapsed if you took money out of your savings account, made pretend you got a pay raise at work, and increased your day-to-day spending accordingly? Or if you own a business, gee, what if you made pretend that money from your emergency reserves was an increase in business revenue and you increased your spending as a result? It's not a revenue, folks. It's just not. And it shouldn't be allowed to be done. So last year, they pulled $1.2 million out of that emergency savings account so they didn't have to have a cut in spending. This year, they're looking for almost quadruple that amount of money. They're looking for $4.5 million. Now, as a practical matter, that $4.5 million creates a hole they have to fill next year, just like it created a hole they had to fill this year. But I guess if you keep going to the well to get money, to get water and make pretend it's raining, well, eventually that well's going to run dry. Then what are you going to do? They're not using the money, and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen has to cast a vote to allow them to do that. I don't understand how this can happen over and over and over again. And $1 million on the tax rate is about 8 cents. So your taxes will be 8 cents higher if they're little state property tax as part of the tax cap assessment trick works. And that 4.5, so the upshot is they max out they overmax what they can get on the, under the tax cap. They siphon off another $4.5 million from the emergency reserves. And then they, add another 11 or so million dollars from the state after losing almost $10 million in revenue from their past budget tricks. And it's a crazy, stupid way to do this. And so I decided that I would come forward and explain it to the mayor and board of aldermen before the mayor released his budget, so that the mayor has no excuse, none, to say, oh, I didn't know that, or play any of the stupid tricks and games that he played last year with the budget. And just reminder, the man who said that he was going to lower your taxes, the man who said it was time to prioritize and reduce spending to finally give you a tax cut, and the man who said that he would never raise your taxes, these are all direct quotes from his campaign literature, gave you the largest tax increase since Robert A. Baines was mayor of the city of Manchester. Then he patted himself on the back for coming in further under the tax cap than any mayor before him, without telling you that the tax cap that he had to work under had the largest increase of any mayor that had come before him. How do you expect to do better than Teddy Gatzis, who had a 1.2% tax cap, when you had a 5.8% tax cap? Oh, yeah, great. So this year, the 3-year average was brought down by the 2.9%. The word out there is that Jay Rouet is going to call it a day. He's going to bring it in under 3% and call it a day. And but that will just mean, by the way, even if he brings it in at 3%, there will be no mayor since Bob Baines, including Joyce Craig, who has spent more money over their term, who has had larger increases in taxes and spending than Jay Rouet, going all the way back to Bob Baines. That is not a fiscally conservative record, and I think I showed you last year how you could have avoided a tax cut. And remember, Jay Rouet had the ability to take $6.5 million in unexpected, air quotes, aid from the state for the schools. He could have put that on to the, he could have said, you know what? You've gotten $36 million added to your budget in the last 2 years. We're going to give this back to the taxpayers. If he had done that, you would have almost not had a tax hike last year. But not only did he not do that, he pulled a stunt. He called an emergency meeting where I think 4 of the 7 Republican aldermen were unavailable to show up. The vote went through. He didn't veto it. It just all. Look, folks, I've been around City Hall long enough to know what's being done intentionally and what's not. What is just, and that was a setup. That was just wrong. That was just wrong. It's like him, it's like everyone say, oh, anyway. So now I'm going to show you. There's this outstanding question about whether or not your city is a sanctuary city. I contend that it's 50-50 at best. I can't say it's completely a sanctuary city, but I think it's more of a sanctuary city than it's not. And over the years, the policy of the Manchester Police Department, one with which I have disagreed, is that because we want people who are here illegally to cooperate with the police as they try to solve crime, that we don't report people that we know are here illegally to ICE, even if those illegal aliens have committed crimes, however violent or however minor. This is the whole idea that, these policies are supposed to make everybody safer. And so because the state police, one of the counties and another town have applied to the federal government to be deputized by ICE so that they can participate in removing illegal aliens, Alderman Ed Sapienza from Ward 8 asked the Manchester Police Department whether or not they had any plans to do that. They said no. And rather than me talking about it, I thought what I would do, and Chris Morgan did. I thought what I would do, and for those of you on Facebook Live, I'll flip the camera around when it runs. I'm going to show you the exchange. And like I said, we're going to do a few stop the tapes, and I'm going to explain some things because clearly there was avoidance at best and deception at worst coming from both the police chief and the mayor. So with that, B, if you could run the
Chief, quick question,
run the
if
tape.
I could, question or two.
I can hear.
Yes,
Chief, in light of recent news, will you be requesting that the Manchester Police get deputized to help federal officials enforce immigration law, just like the state police, Belknap County Sheriff's Office, and Gorham Police Department?
No.
Okay, and could you explain why not? And I'm not suggesting that you do. I mean, it's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So my take on it is we currently have 23 vacancies. We have a hard time getting to all the calls for service that we currently have. I did look into it. There's no funding for that program. it just didn't seem like the best idea for our department.
All right, so it's at least partially a staffing issue, recruitment and retention? At least partly?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I understand that the Manchester Police Department is actually cooperative with the federal officials, and that's great, but that's mainly when the federal officials contact you. Something like this might go a long way as far, for the Manchester Police Department to perhaps be a little more proactive, but if you're not in favor of it, then you're not in favor of it. I don't know if anyone else has any.
Alderman Barry. Thank you, Your Honor. So, Chief, you always cooperate with federal authorities, state authorities, county authorities.
Yep.
So if they needed help, if they had a dangerous fugitive that they need backup, you'd be
Yeah,
more than happy
absolutely.
to help them out.
Yeah,
All right.
they
Thank you.
notify us when they're in the city. To this date, they haven't asked for any help. They know that they can, and we would help them just like any other federal agency that we have.
And I agree with you. I mean, here we are, as a city, we're trying to, get a full complement of officers, and we're having a difficult time doing it. The last thing we're able to do is use our resources for other law enforcement agents that we can't afford to do. So, thank you.
Stop the tape. Stop the tape. So, from that discussion, you would assume that if the Manchester Police Department were deputized by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, that they would somehow be using their personnel on federal operations. That is not true. So, what being deputized would allow them to do is question, detain, and arrest individuals based on their immigration status. So, let's just say they pick up a guy for stealing a car. And because the fellow, in the process of investigating or interrogating or whatever, they discover that the person is here illegally. Well, at that point in time, they don't need to investigate their stolen car case anymore. They know they're here illegally. They slap them in cuffs. They put them in a cell. They call ICE and they say, "We got one for you. Come pick them up." That's what being deputized would allow them to do. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're running immigration patrols. It doesn't mean that they're doing the jobs of the feds. And by the way, the police department recently released crime statistics that show that since 2018, the number of calls for service have fallen from just under 150,000 to just about 100,000, a 35% or so reduction in calls for service. So even with the 20 vacancies, the reductions in call for service, which are in part because frustrated citizens like me who get a case number over the phone to call our insurance company because the police department is too busy to come and handle the issues that happen in our neighborhood. And you would think in one neighborhood where 3 properties were vandalized in one night and there were pieces of evidence that led to somebody in the neighborhood doing it, but they just couldn't be bothered to send anybody out, in any event. Oh, by the way, almost half of the calls for service were initiated by police officers themselves, which means this city of 100,000 people over 12 months has roughly 50,000 residents calling to file a complaint. Anyway, so it's not the case that they would all of a sudden be devoting manpower to doing things with or for the federal government, but in the conduct of their normal, everyday police work in the city of Manchester, it would give them the right and the ability on the spot to arrest anybody who committed a crime in the city of Manchester. If they were illegal, you could arrest them because they were illegal, and you could call ICE, and ICE would come and take them away. This is what the police chief said was it didn't seem like a good idea for the department. Continue.
Chairman Bass.
When an arrest is made, do you know if you have an illegal immigrant or a migrant, whatever they're called, do you know whether or not they're natural citizens or not citizens of this country or this state?
So if we run them, we run everybody that we arrest. If they do have an ICE detainer, we will hold them, call ICE, and wait for them to come pick them up. We do ask their citizenship when we make an arrest. So, yeah.
Stop
Most
the
of them have
tape.
fake ID.
Stop the tape. So, wait a minute. Okay, now, Manchester, with past administrations of the police department, have said they do not ask immigration status. This police chief did. So since this police chief did, here's the question. If you ask immigration status, why wouldn't you want your department's officers to be deputized by the feds so that if you find some criminal that you just picked up for rape or murder or assault or DWI or theft or whatever it is, why wouldn't you want your officers to have the ability to slap them in cuffs and hold them till ICE came to take them? Because right now, under federal law, they can't do that even if they know. And what you just heard the chief said was, well, if we find out there's a detainer, then we'll call ICE. And as you'll see as it progresses, and Kantor's the one that nailed him on this, they will not, if they arrest somebody and they find out they're illegal, they will not call ICE. To me, that's sounding a little bit sanctuary. The chief is trying to have it both ways here. And clearly, he either doesn't know the territory or he's trying to avoid answering the questions in such a way as to lay bare the idea that Manchester definitely has sanctuary operating policies. Continue.
And wait for them to come pick them up. We do ask their citizenship when we make arrests. So, yeah.
Most of them have fake
So, you
IDs.
know.
Do you ferret through that? I mean, do you get through that fake license or fake?
So we fingerprint.
Well, we had a guy that was.
We fingerprint everybody that comes
Okay.
in. And if their fingerprints hit, then we would make the proper notifications.
We had a guy that was arrested that he was under assumed name, and we found out that he had a completely different name, and I know you guys had I got it as an alderman.
Sure.
The guy was.
Yeah, I'm not saying it
they
doesn't
didn't-
happen.
Yeah.
But I would say it is extremely rare.
Is there a
that it
rule or
does.
regulation you guys have in effect that, when you do a booking, photo and a police report, that you don't tell us whether it's an illegal? I mean, I don't know how many of them are getting arrested are not citizens of this city. Or if there's a small amount, or if there's a bigger amount, we don't know.
So if we have a foreign national, we are required to notify their consulate. And it is extremely rare. that we
Stop
get
the
one.
tape.
Okay,
This was a cute one. Foreign nationals. So I actually did a little digging, and there are countries. Okay, first of all, not all foreign nationals are illegal aliens, but all illegal aliens are foreign nationals. Foreign national as a term is generally reserved for those people here legally, and what the chief just said would lead you to conclude that anytime they arrest somebody from a different country, they have to notify consular officials at the nearest consulate, was probably is in Boston or New York, that they've got one of their citizens in custody. The truth of the matter is there are about 40 or 50 countries where we have to do that by as a matter of federal law, but the only two in the Western Hemisphere are Belize and Costa Rica. They're the only two required reports in the entire Western Hemisphere. Most of the other countries that have this must report to the consular thing are European and a handful in Africa and Southeast Asia. So the idea, it's very rare. Well, I can imagine if the only people that you're likely to catch are from Belize or Costa Rica, that it is fairly insignificant. And by the way, if you were deputized, you wouldn't have to notify anybody except ICE when you had somebody here that was illegal. And not for nothing, if they're running fingerprints and they're putting them into the system, they should be able to know whether or not they're here legally, quote, if there's a hit. But unless there is a detainer, meaning ICE wants them, please hold, they will not notify ICE when they have an illegal person, a person here illegally in custody for the commission of a crime. Continue.
Rare that we get one.
okay, so we don't have a criminal, like gang here in Manchester like they do in the bigger cities? that are, these type of people coming from, I don't know, I don't know how to say the name of the gangs members' names, but do we have that?
We have had gang members from certain, these like, nationally known gangs.
Yeah.
Here in Manchester before. We don't have them that I'm aware of embedded in our city. Our city is primarily
Stop the tape.
more.
Well, we don't have them here that I'm aware of. Should I send him the Channel 9 news story that ran a couple weeks ago? We showed you the clip here, and we made a point of showing you the clip because the school department has adopted sanctuary policies that would protect high school gang members. Remember the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts busted, what was it, the Trinitarians or the it was the Dominican Republic gang that recruits from high schools and otherwise recruits people to come here illegally from the Dominican Republic so they can run drugs. Ray Brewer from Channel 9, maybe he got it wrong when he talked about the gangs' connections here to the city of Manchester. Continue.
More along the lines of neighborhood gangs.
Neighborhood gangs.
And gangs that try to pass themselves off sometimes as being affiliated with national gangs such as like the Bloods or the
Try to
Crips.
pass themselves
They may be
off.
offsets and things like that, but primarily no.
Not that big of an issue in Manchester.
No.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any additional? Alderman Kantor.
Thank you, Chief, for all you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just questioning the illegal immigrants that have, if there's any that have been arrested, they went to court, they're undocumented. Would you go back and see if, and speak out to ICE about that? Because there's a lot of people that don't speak English if they're undocumented. Would you directly speak with ICE on that?
No, we would not seek them out on that.
Stop the tape.
If we knew.
So what Kantor just asked is, if you have somebody who's been arrested, has been convicted in court, and you know they're here illegally, would you notify ICE? I just want you to remember, emphasis point, the chief just said no. Continue.
If there was an ICE detainer or anything like that, we would
Yep,
hold them.
back to the detainer.
In years past, there's been several times when ICE didn't come out to get them. And they would say, just let them go and we'll pick them up at court.
Yeah, that's about
Things
the
like
Biden
that
years.
has been the practice before. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
much. So it's not like you're going to directly reach out to ICE if you know someone's undocumented and they've committed a crime? And they're in court?
I'm trying
I guess
to
the
figure
one's
out.
backwards.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if.
Stop the tape. That pause was him realizing what he just said because Kantor summarized it correctly. So if you know somebody's here illegally and they've committed a crime, you are not going to reach out and talk to ICE. And that long pause was him going, oh crap. And then he just said, yes. Back it up a couple seconds so we can pick it right back up, if you would. And actually, bring it back to that. I want to show that again, if you could. Let me know when you're good to go. You'll do. Isn't there just like a little? There we go. All right, let her run.
Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
much. So it's not like you're going to directly reach out to ICE if you know someone's undocumented and they've committed a crime? And they're in court?
I'm trying
I guess
to
the
figure
one's
out.
backwards.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if, how we would know that they're undocumented.
Stop the tape. The police chief is trying to figure out how they would know they were undocumented. Well, when you run their fingerprints in the system, what information do you get? And I just got something from someone on Facebook who said, I know for a fact that Massachusetts arrested an MS-13 gang member who resided here in Manchester. Come on, folks. We know these people are here. The drug trafficking alone in Manchester, tells us what gangs are operating. And, Manchester has gone from being a receiving point to a distribution point for fentanyl and, the Mexican cartels. Let's not dupe ourselves into thinking that we're, Mayberry and Barney Fife is out there on patrol. Continue.
There are states in the country that give out licenses and things like that.
Which
So
is
we would
confusing.
recognize those.
Yep.
Stop the tape. The police chief just said he can't tell if people are illegal because they have licenses from out of state. Question, Chief, how many people with out of state driver's licenses do you in fact arrest? And how can it be that you could have that information and not know their citizenship status if you're running them through the national databases? Continue.
It's a little bit more of a complicated question than.
Yeah, very complicated when you've got all those out-of-state driver's licenses.
Correct.
And still be illegal. And commit a crime. Got it. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Doesn't mean they still can't be sent back.
Alderwoman Carter.
So just to recap, what I'm hearing is there is a set of protocols in place for dealing with people of various statuses that come through your system. That system's been in place for a while, nothing's changed, and it's extremely rare.
Yes. Yeah, our policy is based off the International Association of Chiefs of Police policy, it's best practices. We've been CALIA certified for well over, I think, 30 years. Yes.
Stop the tape.
Then
So let's talk about the International Association of Chiefs of Police for a second, because they're not exactly a hardline organization when it comes to illegal immigrants. I went to their website, I did some searches online, I came up with press releases and policy statements and resolutions, and you'll never guess. They oppose the federal government removing funds from sanctuary cities. They believe that, let me see. Oh, yes, that the International Association of Chiefs of Police also urges all governments to focus on providing safe and secure environment for all individuals, regardless of race, ethnicity, or immigration status. You're safe if you're not being turned over to ICE. They, like I said, they oppose the removal of funds from sanctuary cities, and they believe that they believe that to earn the cooperation of people in the community who are illegal themselves in solving crimes, that they do not turn people over to ICE. Some people would say those are sanctuary policies. And the International Association of Chiefs of Police is not exactly, oh, good, we're following their protocols. Well, I guess somebody should have asked what their protocols are. I would have. Their protocols apparently support the police department's decision not to proactively turn people over to ICE, to not ask for immigration status, because that's what they stand for. And until Chief Peter Marr, every prior chief has said, to my knowledge and to my witness, that they don't ask immigration status because that's not their job. Their job is to protect everybody in the community. And so, roll the tape.
So then I would say that the citizens of the city don't have to concern themselves too heavily with the thought of a potential influx of criminals from other countries that would cause.
I'm not aware of, nor have I been aware of any major problems in the city of Manchester.
Okay,
with-
neither am I, and I didn't think so.
Yeah, we just
Thank
have
you.
so many people here illegally, the schools have engaged in overt
If I may,
sanctuary policies.
if somebody has, I'm not sure what the language you use for ICE, if they have a detainment.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Yes.
If they have a detainment stamp on them and ICE, with ICE, you would then call ICE and say, we've got this guy or
Absolutely.
this person.
Yep.
Are those are those particular people subject to a
All
right-to-know
right,
request?
stop the tape. I'm running out of time, and there's some things that I want to hit on this beforehand. Although Levasseur and Ed Sapienza, alternately brought out good points. Sapienza's reinforced what Kantor got him to say, and that was, no, they don't proactively turn anybody over to ICE. But Governor Ayotte, it is critical for state and local law enforcement to cooperate with federal authorities and protect our citizens. Criminals who are in our country illegally and pose a danger should be apprehended and removed. Apparently, the police chief of Manchester doesn't agree with that because unless there's a detainer, he will not report illegal alien criminals that his department captures to ICE. Moreover, one of the things that other communities in this state, like Nashua and Salem, do is they turn over their arrest reports to federal authorities on a weekly, if not daily, basis. Manchester refuses to do that, according to my sources, despite having been asked by ICE to do it, because ICE wants the opportunity to see who's getting arrested. And not for nothing, when you can't, when you have the number of interpreters that we have in court, look, in order to be here legally, unless you're a refugee who came in under certain circumstances, there are more Hispanic interpreters running around the courts in the city of Manchester than you can shake a stick at. And that's because so many of the people arrested don't speak English, which typically is a harbinger of their status as legals or illegals. So I don't really think the police chief is playing it straight here. And the idea that having the ability, nothing more than the ability to arrest somebody and hold them for ICE based purely on immigration status. No one's saying they should go out looking for them, but when you arrest them for the crimes they inevitably commit in any community, seems to me you would want the authority to hold them for those immigration violations and give them to ICE so they're out of your community. Jay Rouet, oh yeah, so we're not a sanctuary city, right, Chief? Yep, nope, we're not a sanctuary city. Then explain these policies to the rest of us, because I fail to see how not turning over your arrest logs, how not wanting to be deputized so you can hold people when you arrest them for other things and give them to ICE is somehow not right for this department. I am your ever humble host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, be good, be well, don't do anything we wouldn't do. We're proud to have in the audience. Thanks so much for being there. Good night.